I think it's important to to start this presentation with a concept that is that to protect Antarctica, we have to protect its oceans. And so, and I would like um, to walk you through all this, and hopefully you will feel the same way as I feel at the end of the presentation. I started my research career as a marine biologist working on the ecology of southern sea lions and elephant seals in Patagonia. So I did that for many years until one day I decided to focus my work on the conservation of Antarctica. So I left my scientific responsibilities and started to work with other people, and this is what I'm doing right now. I work facilitating processes, promoting initiatives, and always acting as the bridge between the science and the Antarctic marine conservation policies. And I have to say that it is a privilege for me to be working on the conservation of Antarctica and do that with international references such as Paul Nicklin, a renowned photographer, also a good friend, to whom I thank for some of the pictures of this presentation. I think that probably most of you have a special connection with the ocean. So many times you might have find yourself walking on a beach in front of the ocean and you felt happy, like very happy. And so my question is, where is that connection coming from? Is that because the ocean is our geography of origin, meaning life came out of the sea? And I think that this connection between us and the water and the ocean is still alive in us. And sometimes as a society, we agreed on the importance of protecting the ocean, but many times we don't do so. Antarctica is the only place in the world that belongs to all of us. And I would like to emphasize that it belongs to all of us because it doesn't belong to any country. So we are responsible for what is happening in Antarctica. This is a unique situation. And currently, Antarctica is under two main threats: industrial fishing and climate change. The first time I visited Antarctica was 20 years ago. And I've been visiting Antarctica every year since then. And I mean, my crush for Antarctica was instantaneous because the power, the force of Antarctica cannot be described with words. It's not only a place, it's a way to connect with nature, which is another way of connecting with ourselves. The beauty of Antarctica, it really impacts us very deeply. We can say that it touches our soul in a very special way. And emotions really overflow us when we're in front of these huge landscapes. Probably some of you have a fantastic idea of how Antarctica looks like, that not necessarily will correspond with reality. You might think that it's a remote place, very white, full of ice, with a lot of penguins, probably whales. But how is Antarctica really like? But how does Antarctica really look like? So if we go from Argentina to Antarctica by boat, which is one of the most common ways to go there, the first thing you have to do is to cross the fearsome waters of the Drake Passage. This is one of the largest masses of water in motion in the world. And the waves, they can be so high they can reach the fifth floor of the vessel. The first couple of days, or you will see, if you look around, you will see only the wide ocean as your horizon. And sometimes you will feel you're in the middle of nowhere. And the reality is that you are in the middle of nowhere until that awaited moment comes where you see your first iceberg in the distance, and you know you're close to Antarctica. That emotion is unique and unforgettable. When you get to Antarctica, one of the things, the first thing that impacts you is the very large mountains of more than 2,000 meters high with huge hanging glaciers. Because you imagine Antarctica as a kind of flat and uniform place, but this is not how Antarctica looks like. So you start seeing like bays and fjords and islands, and of course, the icing of the cake, which is the ice. And you have two types of ice in Antarctica. One is the ice made out of fresh water, which are basically pieces of glaciers that fall into the ocean, and they create those icebergs that they have different sizes and shapes and shades of blue. And on the other side, you have the ocean that freezes. And this is the sea ice that basically during the winter, the water freezes and you get this very flat ice surface. Of course, life in Antarctica is not shy. Wherever you look at, you will find fauna. It explodes everywhere. And so you will see different species of seals, also different species of whales. And of course, the penguins. Several species of penguins here too. And other seabirds. But it's important to remember that all the life, all the fauna that lives on the coast in Antarctica and on the air, compared to other places, is different because they depend exclusively from the ocean. Not only from the ocean, they depend on the Antarctic krill. Krill is a small crustacean that grows up to 6 centimeters length and represents the largest biomass of a species in the world. But the most important thing about krill is that it constitutes the basis of the trophic web of the Antarctic marine ecosystem, meaning every species eats krill or something that eats krill. And the combination of landscape and fauna in Antarctica is incredible because we're in front of one of the most beautiful sceneries in the world. And we have to remember that all this will not be possible if the krill was not there. And the krill is currently under threat. In 1961, the Antarctic Treaty was created. And through this treaty, all the land and water was devoted to peace and science. And nobody would have thought at that time that years later, fishing will happen in these waters, which are very remote and very inaccessible. But this is what happened. And currently, we have krill under the pressure of krill fishing, and of course, also climate change. It's important to also remember that although Antarctica is not a place that produces a lot of CO2 emissions, it's one of the places in the world that is mostly affected or most affected by climate change, especially through the global warming. There is a massive reduction in sea ice, which has very strong consequences on the life cycle of krill. So when we think about protecting Antarctica, we have to think about protecting the ocean surrounding Antarctica. And the best way, the most effective way to do it is through the creation of large marine protected areas. This is like very large national parks in the water where no fishing is allowed. And marine protected areas not only protect biodiversity, but they also contribute to the resilience of an ecosystem to the impacts of climate change. Basically, they contribute to the capacity of the ecosystem to cope and adapt to those changes. In 2016, the protected area for the Ross Sea was created after many years of very hard work of governmental representatives, scientists, individuals, NGO representatives. The marine protected area of the Ross Sea is the largest marine protected area in the world. Currently, we have 3 marine protected area proposals in Antarctica on the table. One for East Antarctica, that is the area to the right of the slide. One for the Weddell Sea, that is the area at the top. And, and then on the left, the Antarctic Peninsula. And when it comes to the Antarctic Peninsula, it's a very special place because it's very rich in fauna, and also because this is the area where 99% of the tourist activities are concentrating. In addition to that, also a very large proportion of krill fishing. So it's good news that Argentina and Chile have been working for many years on a proposal to create a marine protected area in this region. And this is particularly important because both countries, they claim a similar area, portion of Antarctica. And in this case, instead of competing, they are collaborating. But how is the business of establishing marine protected areas in Antarctica? It's very hard. It's a very arduous task because they have to be agreed by consensus, by a commission that is made out of 25 country nations and the European Union. And after all these years of working on these issues and having participated in numerous meetings at a very high political level, it became clear to me that we are making any progress on the creation of new marine protected areas in Antarctica because of the systematic blockade of China and Russia. And this is something that we've been experiencing in the last 10 years. So there are moments in which I ask myself how many years of professional I still have in order to see all this materialize. I think that we have to be aware what is a task, and as humanity, we have to do whatever is needed in order to make sure that Antarctica is protected. Because if we cannot do that, we cannot achieve this in one of the most pristine places in the world, how are we going to be doing with the rest? We have to ask the current leaders, they have to understand that. We have to ask them to keep having the important discussions, to fight the necessary battles, because there is no room for empty speeches. We have also to ask ourselves, what is Antarctica needing for us? And elevate, raise our voice at the public level in order to make sure that we can create the sufficient compromise and optimism in order to protect Antarctica. Inspiring the youngest is also a very important task. Marine protected areas in Antarctica will become the largest marine conservation achievement in history, in a very important legacy, environmental legacy for all of us. In a world when many of the large, beautiful sceneries have been lost, the protection of Antarctica is not an option, it's a necessity. And in order to protect Antarctica, we have to protect its waters through the establishment of marine protected areas. Antarctica cannot wait. The moment to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. There's a lot we need to unpack there, so I'm just going to get right into it. And I'm going to start by asking you about tourism. I think it's an area that is generating a lot of discussion. And I mean, from my personal experience, just having gone to Antarctica as a tourist, myself. We had one session on the boat. We would have all these lectures every day. We had one session, and I asked one of the expedition guys, what is your opinion on Antarctic tourism? And he said, I'm not going to give my opinion. What is your view on the subject? Do you think that we can have a sort of ever have sustainable tourism, or do you think that sort of there's just space to generate unsustainable behaviors like waste and wildlife disruption? Obviously, given, you know, the beauty of Antarctica is in this fact that the wildlife has not been disrupted to the same extent as it has been in the other sort of parts of the world.
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. I've been going to Antarctica for the last 18 years also on tourist ships. So I know firsthand, you know, the tourist world, if you want. Personally, and this is my personal view, I think that the most important thing when it comes to tourism is to manage the tourism in the right way. So, and that means that, for instance, for example, the Antarctic Treaty has to become the real force in order to manage the tourism activities. Right now, they're more, I mean, the Antarctic Treaty or the TCM, Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, provides guidelines for different places and so on, but the industry is being managed by themselves, like through the IATO, the International Antarctic Tour Operators. And so I think that one of the important things is to manage the activity, to have a cap on the amount of people that can go there, and also look at the landing sites, because, you know, most of the tourists, they go to the same landing sites. And so we are experiencing more and more people going to the same landing sites. And of course, it's not the same. I mean, the impact of tourists, if you have one ship visiting one landing site, or you have like three, one after the other. So I think, I mean, personally, I favor the tourism, but under strict management. And so I think there is a huge task there for the Antarctic Treaty consultative parties to the nations to make sure that this activity is being managed properly.
Do you think like management and communication between these parties and sort of also by organizations such as IATO are strong enough to sort of curb any like negative impact of tourism? Because I know that when we went, we had to undergo, you know, biosecurity. All of our equipment had to be checked. It was just we had, you know, talks and briefings. It was incredibly arduous. But I'm not sure if that would sort of work on a larger scale. I mean, I've been hearing of planes now starting to land in Antarctica. And what is is there sort of potential for this growth in tourism combined with sort of sustainable tourism, or do you think that would not work?
I mean, combining constant growth with any sustainable activity, it's, I would say, a challenge to start with. So I think the communications with, I mean, the different bodies that are looking into that, like IATO, I think IATO as a self-managed organization is doing a good job, but, you know, they're self-managed. And so we need the countries, really, the Antarctic Treaty, which is the central piece of legislation, if you want to do that. And so IATO, for example, participates very actively in the meetings of the ATCM. So I think that the communication between the several bodies is right or okay, if you want. The question is, we need the ATCM to take the responsibility and, you know, create an annex to the environmental protocol that is directed to managing the activity. And so I personally think that, because I've been seeing the industry expanding in recent years a lot, and in the past, I had a better feeling when I was down there. Nowadays, I'm starting to get the feeling there are too many ships. And so I think there need to be some kind of control and management, not only because of the impact that tourists could have, like on a beach, you know, when they walk like close to penguins, which, you know, something that could be discussed, but also because of the potential for oil spills, and, you know, if a vessel has a problem, and that can be a disaster in this area, because there will be no ways to clean that up fast, and they're very constrained areas, and the currents and the ice, it would be a disaster.
Okay, moving on to another area in management, as we're limited in time. You mentioned concentrating fishing of Antarctic krill. Could you explain why krill is being fished exactly, and also how the krill fishing is being policed? I mean, we've also had a comment, about who is deciding sustainable development policies and who is being sort of, I mean, I know you said that Antarctica has no owners, but is there anyone that's accountable for the biodiversity policies in the?
Yeah. Do you have like a couple of hours, or this is the core of our work. If you look from historically, like krill started to be fished in the 60s, and that was by the URSS then, and it was a very heavily subsidized fishery then, because economically it was not real viable. After the decision of the USSR, the subsidies were gone, and with that the fishery kind of went down to almost zero. But in the last, I would say 20 years, probably 15, 20 years, new markets have been identified, especially for the so-called nutraceuticals, where krill oil is being used. Krill oil is very rich on omega-3 acids, and that's that's the key product that the industry is making out of the krill. Then you have, of course, the rest of the krill as krill meal that is being used as part of the diet of, for example, salmon farming. It's not the main diet, but it's part. And so with all this means that the market has become, or the industry has become lucrative. And that's the reason we're seeing more and more fishing vessels on the water. And also, traditionally, krill was fished with trawlers, like I would say medium-sized trawlers, like the one that you saw in the picture that I showed. But now we have what they call the super trawlers, which are very, very big, and they have a different system. They don't have to retrieve the net in order to get the krill. They have a big hose, like vacuuming the water and the krill that is within these very large nets. So the krill gets on board in very good condition, very good quality, and that has, of course, it's good for the quality of the product that then you're going to be selling. So we have this, like the expansion of the markets. We have also the development of new techniques that are more easy in order and more effective in order to get krill. And then the krill tends to, to gather like in swarms in different areas. And so the krill fishing captains, they will look for those swarms that normally are close to the coast. And those swarms normally are close to the coast, close to the foraging areas, for example, of penguins during the breeding season. And so it's not the same if you're fishing for krill, all over the place, like circumpolar, than if you're fishing in a very small bay, if you want, just to make it like a very clear example. So you can reduce the availability of krill in that particular bay, which could have important implications on a certain colony of penguins. And actually we're seeing a reduction in Adelie and chinstrap penguins almost to 50% in the last 30 years. At the same time, we see gentoos are doing fine. So it's not so clear, and we cannot say that it is fishing that is affecting the penguins. But of course, this very localized fishing in certain areas, certain time of the year, it's very complicated. So now going back to who manages this area. As I mentioned before, there is a commission, 25 members in the European Union, and that is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. It's part of the Antarctic Treaty System, and so it follows many of the rules, like the consensus-based organization, also the 4 official languages like Russian, English, French, and Spanish. And, and so in all decisions by this commission, like I said, they should be taken by consensus. So this commission not only looks at the issue of marine protected areas, as I was mentioning before, but it actually the convention was created because of the krill fishery. And in some circles, it's called the Krill Convention. So that convention works, I mean, it's a very complicated, the issues are very complicated, but just to give a very fast overview of it, you have working groups which are made out of the scientists from the different countries. And so they meet and they have conversations. Discussions are very technical. They produce reports that then go to the scientific committee, which meets a week before the commission every year in Hobart, Tasmania at the end of October. So the scientific committee takes those reports, they discuss the reports, and then they make recommendations to the commission. The commission is the body that has to take the decisions. And that goes for MPAs, that goes for krill, also for toothfish, which is another species being fished, not in the peninsula, but on the Indian Ocean and so on. And so the body that manages is CCAMLR, the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. There is no policing there because nobody owns the place. So that means that in order to, there are some kind of inspections from one country to the other, but nobody can police the place. And to make it a bit more complicated, this convention includes not only the area of the Antarctic Treaty, but also many of the subantarctic islands that are owned by certain countries. In those waters around those subantarctic islands, yes, those countries, they have the capacity or they're entitled to police those waters. But as soon as you get into this CCAMLR international waters, there is no police. So depending on the species, like when it comes to toothfish, that I didn't say anything, but it's a very lucrative species. And so in the way the attempts in order to try to minimize the illegal fishing is through the markets. In the case of krill fishing, right now there are no incentives for illegal fishing. And so in a way you have to trust the individual countries when they're reporting on a certain amount of krill. There are issues also related to transshipments in the area. And so it's a world. And one of the there are two important things in the convention that were novel when the convention was established in 1982, which is the ecosystem-based management, meaning that you have to look at, when you're fishing for something, you have to look at the impact of your fishing activity over all species that are related. In the case of krill, it's key because krill sits at the bottom of the trophic web. And also the precautionary principle. And so CCAMLR in that sense was a novel organization in 1982. Now, we're dealing with a lot of issues there, but I think, I hope this answers your question if you have more.